Heat waves, drought, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, blizzards, bitter cold. Extreme weather has an incredible impact on people across the globe. On Mount Washington, our scientists brave some of the worst weather on the planet to improve our understanding of our warming world. All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Mount Washington's Observatory's Science in the Mountains program. My name is Brian Fitzgerald, and I am the Director of Science and Education here at Mount Washington Observatory. And joining us this evening in just a bit to discuss the climate of Death Valley is Dan Berc, who is the Warning Coordination Meteorologist for the National Weather Service's Las Vegas, Nevada office. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for the program. For those of you who aren't already familiar, the Mount Washington Observatory is a nonprofit, member-supported organization whose mission is to advance the understanding of the forces that create Earth's weather and climate. And we accomplish that a few different ways through operating our Summit Weather Station with around-the-clock weather observation and forecasting, by conducting research and product testing projects, and by developing and offering innovative educational programs. If you have questions for tonight's speaker and you're joining us via Zoom, please use the Q&A button that you'll find at the bottom of your video screen here on Zoom. We are able to collect your questions throughout the entire program, and we'll have some time at the end for a live Q&A session, so make sure you get your questions in along the way. If you're joining us on the live stream on Facebook, welcome and thanks so much for being with us. We won't be able to respond to your questions in the Facebook feed during the program, but our Summit staff will try and respond as quickly as they can following the program. And if you'd like to connect through Zoom for the next program, please register using the program link on mountwashington.org/SITM. Alrighty, so let's get things started here. I'm actually going to start things off with a poll for the audience here. So let me go ahead and launch that. And for those of you who are joining in on Zoom, you should see a poll that pops up in your screen here. So go ahead and participate if you'd like. A few questions for you this evening, including wondering where are you joining us from? What corner of the country or perhaps outside of the country are you joining us from this evening? Curious for those of you who are currently members or perhaps future members of the member-supported Mount Washington Observatory. We have some options here tonight. Yes, no, not currently, or no, but if it hits 130 degrees Fahrenheit on Mount Washington, you'll join. Hopefully it doesn't have to come to that. And then a couple trivia questions for the evening here. Let's see. Question 3, when was the hottest world record temperature measured? Was it June 2013, July 1913, September 1922, or July 1931? And then finally, a true or false question here. Death Valley National Park holds the distinction of being the largest U.S. national park outside of Alaska. Is this true or false? All right, seeing quite a few people responding here. We'll give it just a few more seconds so that everyone has the chance to participate before we end the poll. And we'll end it here in about 3, 2, 1. All righty. And let's end it here and I'll share some results. Where's everyone joining from? Well, overwhelmingly, Northeast is well represented here. It looks like even though our speaker Dan is joining from the Southwest, we have at least a couple folks beyond him who are joining. I guess they're already well aware of their climate. And then lots of representation elsewhere throughout the country. Welcome tonight. Are you currently a member of the observatory? Overwhelmingly, yes, 65% of you. Thank you so much for your support. And for those of you who might consider becoming a member in the future, we'd strongly recommend it and appreciate it. And then for when was the hottest world record temperature measured? Looks like July 2013 was the #1 suggestion there, and some guesses on the other options as well. And then true seems to win out for, is Death Valley National Park the largest U.S. national park outside of Alaska? All right, well, we'll find out in just a little bit here. So I'll stop sharing those results and we will get right to it. All righty, well, at this time, I'd love to welcome our speaker for the evening, Dan Berc. Dan, you there? Can you hear me okay?
I can. Hi, Brian. And
Hey,
hello,
great.
everyone else.
And I can see you as well, so even better. Dan, why don't you take it away? We're excited to learn all about Death Valley tonight.
All right, thanks. Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen with you now. All right. There we
That's
go.
good.
All right. Well, again, thank you, Brian. My name is Dan Berc. My title is Warning Coordination Meteorologist. I'm at the National Weather Service office in Las Vegas, and we cover a large portion of southern Nevada, Southeast California, and Northwest Arizona. In fact, we cover the third largest area of any office in the lower 48 outside of Alaska. They said I grew up from the Midwest, usually with where I really learned to love weather with tornadoes and winter weather and such. But I decided to come out west for my meteorology career. All my meteorologist friends tell me that, hey, it's great, go to the desert, it's easy, you can have nothing but press the hot button every day, and it's easiest forecasting in the world. Well, that's many days that's the case. It really is. But I found that the weather's interesting everywhere, not just big tornadoes and big winter storms. It's also really interesting out here in the West with heat and flash flooding and the mountain meteorology. It really is interesting. People, we hear tornadoes and hurricanes, they can do terrible damage, and we totally understand that. It's not, they're not good by any stretch, but the most impactful weather from a human perspective is actually heat and flooding, which is what we get a bunch of out here. It's not as it's not as appealing. I mean, tornadoes, they're big and dramatic. They're on TV. You can take a good video of them. There's hurricanes. Hell, the heck, I mean, they're so big they even get names. There's no such thing as like a heat wave Dave. Maybe there should be, because they're over time. Heat is actually more dangerous. So let's talk a little bit specifically about Death Valley itself. It's located in the desert of Southeast California. It was established as a national park in 1933. And it's a desert. It's classified as a desert. It's where the Great Basin ends and the Mojave Desert begins, kind of wedged in between. And it's the lowest point in North America. Badwater Basin within Death Valley is at 282 feet below sea level. And it's classified as a hot desert climate, no surprise there, with an average high in July of 116.5 degrees. That's average throughout every day of July during the day. That's a normal day is 116 degrees. That's kind of crazy. To put that in perspective, the hottest temperature ever recorded in Las Vegas, which is a very hot climate, is 117 degrees. And that's about the average in July in Death Valley. That's specifically at the climate site, which is at Furnace Creek, which we'll talk a lot about here in a minute. The average annual precipitation is just over 2 inches, which is the driest long-held climate site in the United States. Little history of the site itself, where we take the weather observations. In Death Valley, the first known observations occurred in 1861. There were a couple of scientific surveys that were going on out there, and this was even prior to industry moving in, because they used to mine borax there. In fact, if you've ever heard of the product 20 mule team borax, which is pretty common even today, that's where it got its name. The 20 mule teams out in Death Valley, where they would use the 20 mule teams in order to haul the borax in and out of there. 1911, the first permanent station was installed at Greenland Ranch, which is now called Furnace Creek Ranch, or Furnace Creek was renamed in 1933, when Death Valley became a national park. In 1961, the station was moved to its present location, which is at the Furnace Creek Visitor Center. If you've ever been down there, they have the National Park Service as a visitor center there, and that's where it's presently housed. The Park Service has been taking daily observations for us at that site ever since. We used what was used historically as your standard liquid and glass thermometer. And if you're old as me, you remember those. We used to take our own temperatures with those, but nowadays we can't use that. Mercury is too dangerous, but that's what we used there. Mercury thermometer, and it was always very useful there. In the 1990s, we tried to attempt automation. We have cooperative observers, and with our co-op sites, we install what's called a maximum. It's an MMTS, which is just an acronym for maximum minimum temperature sensor, and it needs to be installed in such a way that you can have a wire comes out of it and goes into the building, where you have a display unit where you can measure the temperature. Well, we tried that out there, and it just did not seem to do too well once the temperatures got up above about 125 to 120, 125. It wasn't inaccurate. It just the instrumentation really didn't handle the heat very well. So we went back to the liquid and glass thermometer, until we discovered in 2012, we installed this equipment out there. It's Campbell Scientific equipment. We don't necessarily promote any particular brand. That just happens to be the ones we chose for this. We run into problems with the record temperature out there is pretty hot. It could potentially get over 130 degrees. And finding mercury thermometers that would go up above 130 degrees was pretty tough to do nowadays. So we had a couple left, but we knew our supply was going to be dwindling and we weren't going to be able to replace them. So we needed to find an automated solution. And this was it. We installed it in April of 2012. And we ran it in parallel with the liquid and glass for 3.5 years or so before we decided that before we made this the official temperature sensor for Death Valley, which it is now and has been since November of 2015. The liquid and glass thermometer, however, we did leave at the site in the shelter that was there. It's called a Cotton Region shelter or a Stevenson screen. We left that there because it's a nice historical piece, and people can come out and when they come out and they can see it and say, wow, this is the type of equipment that they measured the world's record high temperature. So history of heat in Death Valley. We had a temperature of 134 degrees that was reached in July 10th of 1913. That is currently the officially the world record temperature. Now 130 degrees has been hit 3 times, was also hit 3 times that week in the same week, and 3 times out of those in the next 5 days. And other 130 degree temperatures worldwide were the 136 recorded at El Azizia, Libya in 1922, and 131 degrees recorded in Tunisia in 1931 in July. However, the Libyan record has since been debunked, and we'll talk a bit about that one coming up right now. So the 136 degree temperature was recorded in El Azizia, Libya, and it was recorded by an Italian military at an Italian military base. They had been taking the temperatures. Now, immediately or within a few years, there were some concerns brought up about the reading because it just didn't climatologically make sense. It's very close to the ocean, and they have some of these, they have this kind of wind, the faint wind, they would call it the ghibli locally, a ghibli, and these were occurring, and these occur constantly across Libya. It's a southerly wind, an offshore wind, and it is a warm wind and a hot wind. It just seemed a bit excessive. As with all high temperature records or anything, any kind of extreme weather record, it deserves scrutiny, and it did. So they checked it out. This is the type of this is the type of instrument that was used at the time. This was invented in the 1700s by by James Six. He was an Italian scientist, and it's called a Six's thermometer. It measures the maximum and the minimum temperature. So you don't have to go and check it until you reset it. When you reset it, it has the maximum of minimum temperature there since the last time it was checked. Now, these were not common in use. These were not considered to be the best instruments. They're not necessarily inaccurate, but it was not commonly used as a primary instrument. In fact, it's thought that this wasn't the primary instrument even for them at the time. It was used as a backup, and for some reason it had to be used. But if you'll notice on these, if you look on this picture, you'll see that there are little bars here called markers above where the lines of the mercury are. Now, the mercury should read the same temperature on both sides at all times, because what you're measuring is the temperature should match. The numbers are scaled differently on either side. Now, and the markers will go to wherever the mercury pushes on either side. So when it's cooler than the hot temperature, the marker remains where it is until you reset it. The same thing on the other side. Well, it's thought that it's known that this was a new observer. He was writing the observations in the wrong location on the sheet for that most of that month, for the entire month. And it's thought that perhaps he was recording from the top of the marker instead of the bottom of the marker. There's a lot more detail on this story, and it's a fantastic story. There's a documentary called Dead Heat. You can find it on YouTube or Vimeo, I believe it is, and it's fantastic. It's about 25 minutes, and it really explains the whole process they went through in order to overturn this Libya record. It was done by a weather blogger from the Weather Underground by the name of Christopher Burt, and he did a lot of research into this. He's a weather historian and did a lot of research into this and got all the right people involved all the way up to the World Meteorological Organization in order to officially decertify this. Here's an example of what that looks like up close on there. And we thought that, again, in this case, it's an 11-degree difference between the bottom of the marker and the top of the marker. And that may have been what had occurred back then. So, well, I came to Las Vegas in November of 2012, 2 months after the Libya record had been decertified, conveniently coming up on the 100th anniversary of the 134-degree temperature. Well, in my new role here, I thought, gee, it would be a great idea. Let's get together with Death Valley at the National Park, and they have this great auditorium, and we did a workshop or a symposium where we invited a lot of relevant folks who were relevant to the debunking of the Libya record, as well as myself and a couple other people from our office. We did talks. We did talks all day for several hours, and it was really a great experience. We had people come in. People were interested from all over the world. And we had people coming in from Europe, people coming in from Asia, and just to come to this program. And it was really, really enjoyable. So we even had the media interest. We were going to have the Weather Channel out. We were going to have all sorts of media come out to this. Then, just our luck, on June 30th, just 11 days before the 100th anniversary, this happened. 129.2 degrees, the hottest temperature recorded anywhere on Earth since 1931, the Tunisia record. Now, this was real interesting, but all of a sudden, now the media is like, nah, we did heat. We're not interested in coming out to your celebration anymore. So we only had 4 media outlets at the 100th anniversary event. And two of them were local stations, one out of San Diego and one out of Las Vegas. And one of them was the Weather Channel sent a contract team out to just kind of talk about it. But it was still a great event. And this is what it looked like. This picture on the right are several representatives from our office. In the center is Christopher Burt, who is the weather historian who actually began the process of debunking the 136. And on the far right is Dr. Randall Cerveny, Arizona State. He is the representative of the WMO, who is in charge of world records. And on the left there is a picture of after we did our symposium, we all went out to take the official observation that afternoon. It was 120 degrees at the time we did that. So it was extremely hot, and at the time, the hottest I had ever experienced. So that brings us up to this year. Sunday, August 16th, 2020. This is what happened. We hit 130 degrees. Now, the media gets interested in Death Valley every time we're forecasting anything over about 127 degrees. 127, 108, 28 degrees, my phone rings off the hook with interest from the media. Hey, will it be, are we going to hit 130? Are we going to potentially break a record? Are we going to possibly break a record? All these things happen. I get all these calls from the media every time we get something close. So this was a real shock to all of us. We hit 130, and this broke the previous record that was of 125 set on that day. We had only forecast 125 for this day, so it was really kind of a surprise to us. I got a call at about 4 p.m. saying, guess what? We just hit 130 in Death Valley. This was on a Sunday, so I had to prepare. That evening, I was already getting phone calls from European media asking for interviews and such. It hit 129.9 officially at 3:41 p.m. local time, and the site is at an elevation of minus 194 feet. We recorded it on that instrument when we showed you the picture of it earlier. And we even created a website with this and some other information about the record. If you'd like to check it out, it's at www.weather.gov/VEF. That is the 3-letter identifier for our office. / Death Valley 130. And like I said, when we get these kinds of temperatures and these kind of crazy high temperatures, and it hits 130 in this case, who wants to know? Everybody. This is just a subset of all the media interviews I had to do the next couple of days. I spent the entire day Monday doing nothing but fielding emails and phone calls and Zoom videos or Zoom calls, Skype. It was kind of crazy. So what happens when we do get these kinds of climate extremes? How do we certify or decertify, in the case of Libya record, these kinds of things? Well, first, a state or a national climate extremes committee is convened, and this is usually made up of the state climatologist. It depends on what type of record it is. A state climatologist will set up a team with usually a representative of the National Weather Service and some other climate scientists and such, or in the case, maybe even like Death Valley National Park employees and that kind of thing, in order to assess the validity of the record. And once that's set up, a paper is written up, a scholarly paper, a journal article, and then it is official in the eyes of the state or the country or the WMO, whoever is leading this process. Now, we are currently looking into the 130-degree record to see if technically it's not even a record. The only record it is it would be the hottest temperature in the state of California in the month of August, or anywhere in the month of August. But but as it was the first 130 hit in 90 years, we decided that it's probably a good idea to kind of dust off the chops, see if it's, dust off the process and make sure we can, we can check it all out. The first thing we did is we went out and we actually removed and replaced the sensor that took the 130-degree reading, and we sent that back to a place out east. I wasn't involved with where it went, but I know we sent it somewhere in the Northeast where they are checking it and ensuring that it was accurate, that the machine, the instrument was performing properly. And it's in that process now. We'll be sending the data logger will get looked at as well. So the whole system will be they'll ensure that it was working properly and that it can be considered valid. And then another group of people, including the state climatologist for California, which is a part of the Department of Water Resources, NCEI, the data gurus for the Weather Service, National Weather Service, the local. I'm included in this, as well as my boss, and the World Meteorological Organization. Randy Cerveny is going to be convening a group of scientists who are involved with the Libya process too. And these guys, he told me who they are, but I don't remember their names. But they're like the rock stars of the meteorology world, meteorology scientists, like researchers and such. Many who have been involved with the World Meteorological Organization for quite some time. So at any rate, where we are in the process now for this 130 is we're getting the instrumentation looked at. The state climatologist, as well as us locally, and the National Center for Environmental Information, we're collecting data. We're collecting data on this site, on the site that the Death Valley site, but as well as other sites that are nearby, to see if, was this a reasonable observation? Was it reasonable based on a temporal scale? Was it reasonable based on what happened the day before, the day after? Was it reasonable it happened under other similar meteorological conditions? Was it reasonable based on what other sensors in the area were picking up and how they would be and how they were over time? So it's pretty deep dive into the data in order to ensure that it's reasonably possible that this record actually occurred. So we're still in this process. It takes a long time. We're 8 months into it already, 9 months into it already, and we're still going strong. So we expect within the next year or so to have a paper out to explain why or why not this 130-degree is valid. And that's all I have right now for this presentation, but thank you very much. My email address is here. If you have any questions for me directly you can email me, or I'm happy to answer questions now. I know Brian said there were going to be some, you guys had the opportunity to put them in chat, and I'll be happy to sit back here and answer them now.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Dan. I really appreciate you taking the time to explain a little bit about Death Valley, and specifically, I know what some of us here at MWO were particularly interested in, which is the certification process of world record extremes. The observatory here being at least somewhat familiar with that process, though not recently with wind speeds, anyways. So, folks, if you have questions for Dan as you're thinking of them, quite a few questions already coming in right now. Again, if you're on Zoom, go ahead and just find the Q&A button that you'll find at the bottom center of your toolbar there, and you can enter your questions there. We'll try and get to as many as possible. For any that you can't, that we aren't able to answer tonight, including those on Facebook, we'll try our best to follow up on Facebook in the comments there. You can reach out to Dan directly via his email right there. You can also reach out to education@mountwashington.org, and we can certainly try and follow up with Dan as well. Um, All right. So with that said, lots of questions, and I'll try and get to other people's questions before my own because I know you've certainly piqued a lot of my curiosity too, Dan. But first things first, a couple questions from some folks who are curious about your background for I think your slides and even maybe on your virtual background. Are we looking at salt or what are we looking at there?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking at. That is the salt flats in Death Valley, and this is what happens once there's been a little water, maybe in the spring, and then it all dries out. And this is what you can see. This is actually pretty common out here in the West, where there is a lot of salt mining, which of course doesn't occur within the park, which is why it's so pristine looking here. But yeah, it's a salt flat.
Yeah, pretty foreign to at least for maybe some of the New Englanders who are joining this evening. Um, Question here from Alan: what's the lowest temperature ever recorded at Furnace Creek? Do you know off the top of your head?
Muted for a second. Let's see here. I can come up with that super quick. There we go. Lowest temperature ever recorded at Furnace Creek was 15 degrees. And it occurred also in 1913, which is pretty darn cold. But yeah, we've never been below zero out here in the desert. We never get below zero out here in the desert. And even in Las Vegas here, the lowest temperature ever recorded was 8 above. So
Still pretty chilly. That's quite the range
yes,
in temperature.
yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks for that. Let's see. Here's a question from Kenneth. Because it's interesting that you mentioned now both the extremes being featured back now quite a long time ago in the record. Kenneth asks, do you believe the record in Death Valley for the highest temperature will be broken due to the effects of global warming?
I think it's possible. It's certainly possible. Well, when I don't know. I don't know how quickly it's going. I can tell you from experience that the while we are warming, absolutely, a lot of that out in the desert here, and particularly in Las Vegas, we're seeing that being reflected more in higher low temperatures than higher high temperatures. We are increasing in the high temperatures, but the low temperatures are much higher than they were before, which is causing the average temperature to go up. So I certainly believe we can. I think the atmosphere has it in it with the climate change. So we'll see what happens. I hope it doesn't happen tomorrow. That's for sure. But it'll likely happen.
Yeah, well, certainly that those warm overnight low temperatures, something that we're seeing in a lot of areas, including here in the Northeast, even on Mount Washington.
Yeah.
Question here from Sam, and I know we were talking about this before we started the program here, which was interesting. Sam's curious: is it hotter at Badwater Basin or Furnace Creek? And do you know? And I guess sort of, how would we know? Do you have instrumentation in both places?
The answer is I would wager that it is hotter at that Badwater Basin. It's part of the equation as to why it gets so hot is elevation, and Badwater Basin is 90 feet lower the than the sensor at Furnace Creek. So I think it would be reasonable to say that it is hotter at Badwater Basin. There is a sensor down there. It is not owned by us, and I don't know that it's. I know it was done. It was put there by a professor a couple of decades ago who had a NASA grant. The professor is now retired, and the data is now, and the sensor has not been maintained. So we don't have the data, and I don't know how much I'd trust recent data from there just because the sensor hasn't been maintained. However, keep your eyes out. We may in the future have a sensor at Badwater, but we haven't gotten it. We haven't gotten one yet.
Well, sort of tying on something you touched on in there, Dan. I know we have a question here from Steven that you're sort of implying here with your background information about elevation. Stevens asks, it seems that the higher you go in the atmosphere, the lower the temperature generally. Is there any correlation between lower temperatures and, excuse me, lower elevations and higher temperatures? I'm curious that has never been as hot at the Dead Sea, which has an elevation that's even lower than Death Valley. Um, any thoughts about that, or even I don't know what your expertise is around the climate of the Dead Sea?
Oh, absolutely. You just said it. The Dead Sea. This Dead Sea is right there. The fact that the oceans there, the sea, also plays a role in the temperature. It's not strictly elevation. There's so much more that can go into it, and one of those is proximity to water. And again, this is one of the reasons why there was reason to question the Libya record. It is kind of close to the water, and the water tends to moderate things. It tends to make under hot conditions, it tends to cool it down. In other cooler conditions, it tends to warm it up. This is why we don't have a whole lot of snow, or not snow that lasts, or extreme cold temperatures near the ocean. Even in places like Seattle, which is far, far north of places that do get a lot more snow, their proximity to the water really, really moderates it. The more scientific definition is moist air is harder to heat than warm air, than dry air. Sorry, moist air takes longer to heat than dry air, and if you have a really dry air, it'll heat up quicker.
Interesting. Yeah, and for those of you joining tonight who have been following the observatory's virtual classroom program, we've been talking all about what the major factors of climate zones and how they occur, and those major factors. And Dan mentioned at least a couple of those right there. Proximity to large bodies of water, certainly a major factor. Dan, here's a question actually, I think more about your professional background here a little bit and how the National Weather Service works. Based on your title, Bernadette asks, are you the one that warns about catastrophic weather? Is that your job? Can you describe your title and job a little bit?
Yeah, in a way, my title is Warning Coordination Meteorologist, which essentially means I coordinate our warning program. So when we issue a tornado warning or a severe thunderstorm warning or a flash flood warning or any kind of warning, my responsibility is to oversee that program where our forecasters will issue these warnings. On top of that, I serve as the primary liaison between the forecast office and the outer world, if you will. I'm the primary liaison between the Weather Service office and the media and the emergency management community, law enforcement community, and the public.
Excellent. Yeah, you got your hands full, and I know there's quite a bit of specialization at each forecast office as well. Question here back to the Alan asked a question about the 130-degree record recently. He's curious if this was checked against the mercury thermometer. Is there any reference with the mercury thermometer that's still there, or is that purely for historical purposes at this point?
That's a good question. I went out there afterwards, and and we did check with the mercury thermometer. The mercury thermometer showed up at 129 that day. However, the mercury thermometer, for those of you familiar, the mercury thermometer has to have a solid mercury from one end to the other. And what we found, which is common with mercury thermometers and older ones in particular, that the mercury had split. So it was not necessarily accurate. And as we installed that sensor and it became official in 2015, we had not been out there to maintain and replace or repair those thermometers there for over 5 years. So, or for almost 5 years. So yes, while it did record 129, it was not a valid sensor as the mercury had split.
As one of the few organizations that still uses lots of mercury thermometers, we know well that they need a lot of supervision and care, and even when we're using them every hour here, we definitely need to keep an eye on them. But they do work nicely when you maintain them. Here's a question, a more general, maybe more of a philosophical question from Marie, who asks, how likely is it that there are record temperatures occurring that are not being measured, and where might those be? And I don't know, maybe you can even speak to, I mean, there's probably all sorts of other records, even beyond temperature, that perhaps we're missing globally or regionally.
My answer to that question in the vein of temperature, most likely we're getting pretty darn close to the highest temperatures possible and that we were recording. I can't say there isn't a place where it hasn't never gotten below above 134. In fact, I would wager the day it got 134 here, it was probably warmer at Badwater Basin. But there's a reason that we have official climate sites, where they're located, and it's not necessarily always to find the greatest temperature or find the greatest wind or find the greatest rainfall amount. We're limited by a lot of things. Where can we have this instrumentation? Where can we have people to check this instrumentation out? If we were doing it strictly meteorologically, absolutely, we would have probably stuck it in the middle of Badwater Basin and tried to get the hottest temperature. But unfortunately, we got to put it where the people are, and where we can monitor it. So I'd say in the case with a lot of different weather records, you're absolutely right. There are possibly places that will have more extreme readings than what we're getting. I always talk about, I remember talking about, I said, you could take a thermometer and stick it next to Kilauea in Hawaii, and you're going to get a lot of hot temperature next to that lava flow as it's flowing than you are at Death Valley. But it's not an official climate site because it's not always going to be there like that either.
Yes, yeah, a lot of qualifiers when you start talking about records like those sorts of things, but important when you start hearing words like directly and reliably measured and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. Here's an interesting question from Paul, who's curious about, do you know what the humidity was like at maybe even the 130-degree temperature? Or what is humidity generally like at these incredibly hot temperatures in Death Valley?
I can't give you an exact number, although it's being looked at for this as well. But you're usually talking, when you're here seeing temperatures 120 over 125, you're looking at generally at humidity readings well below 10%, 3%. At times it's very, very low humidity out there in general during the summer. Until this makes another interesting bit. It's rare. This year was really, really rare. We didn't have, we normally are in the Southwest, we normally have what's called the monsoon season. Our North American monsoon shows up usually around July 4th and sticks around for about 8 to 10 weeks. And during that time, we have extra moisture in the area. And when we have extra moisture in the area, we tend to have higher humidities, and therefore we can't quite reach those extreme temperatures, which is why a lot of these extreme temperatures in Death Valley are late June, early July. Last year, we didn't really have much of a monsoon. It just never really developed. So this is why we were able to have this 130 show up in August, because it was that dry, when normally in August, it wouldn't be that dry.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is it's pretty darn dry in conditions like that. Yeah.
Extremely.
Yeah. Susan asks here, curious about, are there any living creatures in Death Valley? For one, let's think about the natural world for a second. And then also was curious, does it snow in Death Valley?
It's extremely rare for it to snow in Death Valley. It could, and it has. I've got pictures of it somewhere, but there was in 1974, I believe it was, they got 4 inches of snow at Badwater Basin. It's exceedingly rare, but it can happen. As far as animals, I am not an expert on the fauna of the Death Valley, but I do know there are animals there. There are lizards and such, and I think there are a couple of hardy mammals, but they're very small mammals. And I shouldn't even say that. Well, I don't want to say met, but run into a coyote out there right at Furnace Creek, where they have a golf course and it's irrigated and such. But I've seen a coyote out there. So yep, there's quite a bit of animals out there.
Yes, I'm sure more likely to see people probably. All right, lots of great questions here, and thankfully we still do have some time, so we'll try and get to as many as we can. Um, Sorry, just take it one second here. So here's a question from Gary, who's curious about, I guess, sort of the typical range and average temperatures throughout the year. So, I mean, say for summer, do you happen to know off the top? I mean, you might have your norms in front of you there. Do you know what the typical range is at any given point during the year in Death Valley?
You mean typical range like diurnal range?
Yeah, like diurnal.
Like that in a diurnal range in Death Valley it can range. We'll get high temperatures. 120s are not uncommon. 120s all the time, and usually on the days we have 120s, our lows are in the 90s, low to mid 90s often. The hottest low temperature ever recorded anywhere, as far as we know, is 110 degrees at Death Valley, and that I would not have wanted to been camping out that night.
Yikes. Um, let's see. A question for it's hard to imagine that at all, which is why I'm laughing. But Wendy asked a good question. It was one that I was curious about. I mean, I guess going back again to sort of the major factors that force that excuse me that create the climate of Death Valley here. Wendy is curious. What is the primary geological reason that this is the hottest location in the U.S.? What are those features that really come into play here? I know you mentioned elevation was one.
Yeah, geological features. The elevation is the primary, and the fact that there's no water flowing through there. There's not a whole lot of hydrology going around there in the summer. So the fact that it's so dry, and part of the reason that it's big part of the reason that it's dry is there are several mountain ranges between the Death Valley and the nearest source of water, which is the Pacific Ocean. The atmosphere, when it comes and brings tries to bring moisture into Death Valley, it has to go over several mountain ranges, and it loses some of that moisture every time it passes over a mountain range. So even when we have a good setup for rain or precipitation in Death Valley, it doesn't get as much as you would hope, and that's why that lends to its 2.3 inches per year number.
Yeah. Yeah, so certainly the kind of that rain shadow effect and all those. And then another thing I was reading the other day was even just because it's such a low elevation, high mountains sort of surrounding a little bit. For these really high temperatures, are you also finding that wind is relatively low, or does that come into play at all?
No, it can be windy. It can be
Oh,
windy at times. We haven't noticed. I mean, wind really has a greater effect on temperature during the winter months when we develop a nocturnal inversion. Science content here. We develop a nocturnal inversion when the air near the surface cools off faster, or cools off at all, whereas it doesn't above there. So you actually have a warmer temperatures above the surface. During the day, that inversion gets eroded, as we say. And that's it. If you don't have that inversion gone, which is either done by daytime heating or by wind, you're gonna you're not going to be able to reach that potential maximum high temperature that you could. So obviously, in order to reach extreme temperatures, you're going to have no inversion, which isn't a problem during the summer, which that happens every day during the summer. But in the winter, sometimes you don't get that. And if it's calm, you're not going to get that mechanical turbulence that mixes out that inversion, and it'll be cooler than it would be otherwise.
yes, just like
So
when Mount Washington's the warmest place in the state because it's a nice, cool, a very clear, calm night. No wind involved there.
that
But
being
also,
said, though, that
yeah.
being said, there is a really rare, and there was theory that this could have been what happened in 1913, but there's a rare phenomenon called a heat burst, which will usually only occur near a thunderstorm. Um, and that's when you're in a thunderstorm in a very dry environment. It can actually put out, normally when you're near a thunderstorm, you're getting cold wind coming out of the thunderstorm, but you can get this under just the right conditions. You can have the wind basically doing that same kind of thing and causing what's called a heat burst. But it's extremely rare and extremely unlikely that it happened to occur on that one day in that location.
Interesting. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I wonder what the odds really are. Here's a bit of trivia for you if you still have your stats available to you. There must be a lot of New Englanders or Northerners during the program. A lot of curiosity about how cold it gets in Death Valley. Um, Steven wants to know, what is the lowest daily maximum temperature recorded in Death Valley? Would you happen to know that? That's oh, and as you're looking through that, I'm looking through lots and lots of questions. So many people sending questions along. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your curiosity with us, and apologies if we're not able to get to everyone this evening. Got an answer, Dan?
The lowest, repeat the question for me. Is it the lowest maximum temperature?
Correct.
All right, the lowest maximum temperature in Death Valley was recorded twice. It was 38 degrees. So there's never, at least since we've had records in 1911, we've never had a high temperature below freezing.
All right. Yeah. I mean, hey, pretty chilly. Obviously, there's probably quite a few people joining tonight who are probably laughing at that, but that's okay. Oh, I lost the question already, and apologies if I don't get your name here, but I'm sure you've piqued a lot of interest here tonight, and folks are clamoring for some heat, especially for those of us up north. Um, Generally, I'm sure you get this question a lot. What's the good time to visit Death Valley? I mean, I guess it depends on what you like for weather and all that, but what do you generally tell folks who ask that question?
Yeah, if you're interested in experiencing the hottest weather on earth, come out in early July, late June, early July. You won't be let down. I promise you. You'll get some serious temperatures. Um, However, if you're interested in just going out and seeing the sights and doing that and doing it, really anytime, I always say, like, this time of year, April, this time of year through May is really nice out there, as well as, usually October, November are beautiful times of the year. The temperatures aren't too extreme, and you can experience all the Death Valley has to offer. Because Death Valley, as stated for the previous question, Death Valley is the largest national park outside of Alaska, and it's 3.3 million acres or something. It's
Wow.
insanely big. I've only experienced about half of it, and there's so much more to see. And I strongly recommend you, if you like national parks, there's so many different things to see in Death Valley. And but yeah, if that's what you're going for, I'd go in the shoulder seasons. But if you want to experience the heat, late June, early July is your best shot.
Yeah, something tells me we have a few extreme weather junkies joining the program tonight, so they might be there in July. All right. Here's a question, an interesting one from Mike, who asked, I know that on Mount Washington, the placement of an anemometer is critical to maintaining a consistent record. Is sighting of the thermometer as sensitive? What are some of the considerations around sighting thermometers?
Setting a thermometer isn't necessarily as sensitive to get an accurate or to get a good reading. There are certain requirements that need to be that. If you're setting an anemometer, obviously, if you put it next to a building, it's certainly going to affect the speed and direction. Whereas the thermometer, it's not quite as stringent as that. You want it a little bit away from a building, but we kind of have standards. We want to measure between 5 feet and 2 meters above the ground, and it needs to be in an area that's well aspirated, where there's some wind, ideally, to be able to keep off it, and in the shade. It needs to be in the shade as opposed to in the sun, so we get temperature that we can compare apples to apples everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. I'd be curious to see what a thermometer directly in the sun would read in Death Valley. Probably much hotter. Let's see. We'll just have time for just a couple more questions here. Thanks, Stan, for answering so many, and thanks to all of you for sending in lots of questions. Relatedly to anemometers, happen to know what the record wind speed is in Death Valley? That's an interesting question.
I don't, off the top of my head. We don't archive wind data from there, but regularly, and it's usually a north wind when we get them. At least at Furnace Creek, we'll get winds 50, 60 miles an hour at times, but we won't see extreme winds like like are seen anywhere near what you'd see at Mount Washington, for example, in the basins there. You just won't. That would have to be one heck of a cold front. But the most extreme winds they would get there is generally outflow from thunderstorms. Since thunderstorms are usually pretty dry out there, they have a chance for all the water to evaporate on the way down and create some pretty strong downdrafts. So if we're ever going to have a wind of about over 100 miles an hour, 80 or 100 miles an hour, I would bet my bottom dollar that it was associated with a thunderstorm outflow.
Yeah. And actually, relatedly, this is a good question from John. Does Death Valley see dust storms?
Oh, you better believe it. Yep. Every time there's a really strong wind, that goes over a good dust source, which a lot of these dry lake beds are. So, in fact, the lake Badwater Basin, we get a lot of dust storms right through there. Fortunately, they don't impact too many people very often. There isn't as much dust there as there are available as there are in some other places in the Southwest. So we don't usually have too many problems, but there's certainly some areas that are prone to blowing dust.
Yeah, again, just something a totally foreign concept for a lot of us thinking about what a dust storm looks like around here. I know our observers are trained to spot one if they see one. Don't think we've coded one from the summit of Mount Washington in our record, anyways.
Now come out here. I'll point you to lots of places you can observe them.
Excellent. All right. Well, I think that unfortunately is all the time we have just for this evening. Again, first off, thank you, Dan, so much for sharing your expertise tonight and for answering so many questions. Thanks everyone for joining here. If I didn't get a chance to have your question asked tonight, please feel free to follow up directly with Dan or with myself here at education@mountwashington.org. We'd love to be able to answer your question for you because I know there are plenty of great questions we weren't able to get to tonight. Um, if you enjoyed tonight's free program, please consider becoming a member of Mount Washington Observatory if you aren't one already, and or donate to help support programs like these over at mountwashington.org. Don't forget to join us for our next Science of the Mountains program on Tuesday, April 13th at 7 p.m. with Mount Washington Observatory senior meteorologist Ryan Knapp and author and risk professional Ty Gagney, who will be presenting on understanding Mount Washington Observatory's higher summits forecast. And that'll have a focus on how to assess environmental knowledge and how that plays into making risk-based decisions in the backcountry. So don't forget to register for that program and for any of the programs you missed previously. You can see some recordings over at mountwashington.org/SITM. All right, well, thanks again, Dan. Thanks all of you for joining this evening, and we'll see you again soon. Have a good night, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.